Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Inspire Health podcast. And today's guest is Dr. Linda Backman. And Dr. Backman has been featured on Coast to Coast AM and Gaia TV. She's an expert teacher, regression therapist, and licensed psychologist with 45 years of private practice experience, including over 25 years guiding soul regressions. She has conducted thousands of past life and between lives soul regressions in person and remotely. Linda founded the Ravenheart Center and Training Institute in Boulder, Colorado in 1997 and teaches regularly worldwide. She's the author of Souls on Earth, The Evolving Soul, and Bringing Your Soul to Light, a couple of books you can see here on the YouTube video. She is an international expert in understanding how reincarnation plays a pivotal role in your personal growth and relationships. And we are super excited to have her on the show with us today. Linda, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Jason and Taya. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I think this will be really fascinating. We were just saying we've had such fascinating conversations in this entire series. I think this has probably been the biggest series we've run so far, because even as we've gotten halfway through it, we keep finding other people that we think will bring another angle to this perspective. With the whole purpose of this is to just keep bringing a larger perspective so that we can think differently, that we can perceive the world differently, we can make different choices based on new information and how we show up in the world.
And we can even see our challenges in life differently.
Yeah, I think a lot of the work that you've done in your books, I think, brings that to light over and over again as you've gone through the different regressions. I'm wondering, Linda, for people that aren't too familiar with this type of work, can you start by giving us a bit of an overview of what is past life regression and how that process works, and how people are able to tap into their past lives, and how you even came to this to begin with?
It's a loaded question.
Yeah, that might be the whole interview right there.
A loaded question with perhaps not a small answer. Okay. I'll just try to give you, it's always hard to put it in a nutshell. I'll just give the listeners and the two of you the quickie version, so to speak, of how did I get into this work. So I'm a licensed psychologist by training. I often say to clients that my clients come in two different flavors, flavor A and flavor B. I'm flavor B. So flavor A of my clients is people that come for regression, which I'm happy to explain in a moment. People that come for regression and they've known they are a soul and body, perhaps with a guide, with a loved one on the other side, perhaps, that serves as a guide. They've known that since they were 5 to maybe 15 years old. That's flavor A. Flavor B is me, as well as many other people. I didn't believe in any of this until I was in my middle 40s, which now, relatively speaking, is a long time ago, but approximately 30 years ago. So when I was in my middle 40s, I had a very dear colleague die. And again, I'll just say, I didn't necessarily believe in reincarnation, the soul. I just basically knew little or nothing about that. When he passed, two things happened. I started sensing his presence. I could intuit that he was communicating with me. That seemed weird and almost exciting at the same time. And then I found that in my mind's eye, in the darkness of my bedroom in the morning or at night, when I was in bed, I believe that I began to see scenes of past lives I'd shared with him. So I thought, either I'm losing my mind and, I need medication and a therapist, which there's nothing wrong with that, but, or there's something to this. So again, to try to make this short, I said to my husband, who's still my spouse, I said to my husband, could you sit down? I want to tell you what's going on with me. We've always been pretty liberal people, but we'd never talked about soul and reincarnation. So my husband sits down. I explained to him what's going on. He knew my colleague well. They were friends. They played golf together at times. And I told my husband, what was happening for me. And essentially, my husband looked at me calmly and I said, okay, I can tell from the look on your face, you don't think this is strange, right? which surprised me. He said no. I said, why? And basically he said that he must have repressed something that occurred for him as a child. And what he told me was new to me, but he'd repressed it for, I don't know, 30 years or some such thing. He said when he was a boy growing up, he knew his past lives in detail. And he said he never questioned it, but he never told anyone. And he forgot about it. He thought no one would believe him. So that was permission for me. That was sort of like what we might call carte blanche to move forward. And as a psychologist, I was nervous because I thought, oh, many of my referrals and colleagues are medical doctors, and they're going to think I'm crazy. That never happened, and my work began to change. So I began to discover, as I took training in hypnosis, training in regression, and I guide both past life regression, but I guide also between lives regression, originally the work of my mentor years ago, Dr. Michael Newton. I guide clients to discover their past lives that explain things in life today and who they are as a soul. Why are they in body? How did they plan their lives? What do symptoms that they have mean? Are they past life symptoms? Are they, there's a term that we often use, HSP, highly sensitive person. For what reason are they a highly sensitive person? What's that about? And I'll stop there without going any farther. And so regression is easier than people think it will be when they're guided by an experienced and trained therapist.
Linda, I'm curious, did your experience and your insights that you were getting, did they in any way conflict with your upbringing and prior beliefs or even religious upbringing that you may have had?
That's a beautiful question. For me, primarily, the answer's no. I was raised in a Western religion, but I learned little or nothing about soul, reincarnation, any of that. And then I began to expand that. So just for listeners, if listeners are, raised or continue to be involved in a Western religion, there are mystical teachings from many of the Western religions. The Sufis, the Kabbalah teachings teach reincarnation, but I didn't know that because I wasn't raised with any of that. So for the most part, it didn't conflict.
I've had conversations with lots of different people this past while that, like you had said earlier, sometimes feel like they're actually going a little bit crazy because whatever's been going on, particularly, I think, over the past few years, it's shaking a lot of people up. And I find a lot of people are connecting to past lives, almost like conflicting with their current reality a little bit and how they're even showing up and even what feels more real in certain ways and how they're even seeing a lot of times they're wanting to make big changes in their life right now, which is challenging given the way their life is set up. When some of this stuff starts to come forward for them, and this has not even been doing actually regression, I feel like there's almost spontaneously coming up for people. What's going on with that right at the moment from your perspective, or have you seen more of that too? And how do people start to navigate it when that surfaces?
Well, I think, Jason, sort of what you're referring to is people are looking for more answers. They're looking for more explanation. Why do I have this fear that seems to have nothing to do with my current life? Why do I have this physical symptom that doesn't seem to relate to my current life? Why do I want a deeper understanding of life? I mean, I think that we all know life in body on this planet can be challenging, from health issues to relationship problems and childhood abuse issues. And, it just kind of goes on from there. And, I'll just say at the heart of my hearts, I'm a therapist. I started out as a psychotherapist and became a psychologist. Actually, my mentor, Dr. Michael Newton, was also a trained therapist. So my goal with people is to help people understand, why am I who I am? In other words, why have I had these challenges? Why did I grow up with an alcoholic mother? Or why did I have a father who passed when I was 12? Why have I had an autoimmune disorder since I was 18? Why do I feel I don't fit on this planet? Who am I, and for what reason am I here? And I think the overall goal, if it's always hard to make it simple, but if I try to make it simple, it's to help people normalize themselves, normalize themselves to themselves, if I can put it that way, and stop judging themselves and stop thinking there's something wrong with them. And almost always through regression, there are explanations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's really beautiful, Linda. And I know even from my side, I mean, I practice as a naturopathic doctor and an osteopath. And when I've actually seen the realm of spontaneous healing, it's usually when something along those lines occurs. It's some sort of an aha moment that just lands for them and lets them let go of whatever it was. Either it just doesn't mean anything anymore, or there's something that settles, and like an answer that just arrives, and it's like everything just shifts, and then the healing process is able to be facilitated. Have you found things like that too in your practice?
I mean, yes, and you certainly know, Jason, through your work, your osteopathy and your broader practice, is that our physical body can hold trauma. Yeah, I mean, yes, it can hold trauma from current life. That's certainly possible. But our physical body also holds trauma from past lives. And when we latch on to, oh, here's what happened in the past life, I'd say 8 to 9 times out of 10, that physical symptom is either completely obliterated or certainly lessened to the point that the patient copes with it in a more effective manner. And I know we'll get into conversation in our time today to also talk about we might say different types of souls or soul origin. And that also explains oftentimes emotional symptoms, physical symptoms that at times just simply go away, which is kind of amazing.
It really is, I think it gives such a different perspective to healing when you start to expand out into looking at what I kind of think of these different bodies of health and how we can address these ones farther up the chain and more abstract than the physical body. And it segues perfectly because I wanted to ask you, you talk specifically about earth-based souls, interplanetary souls, and then angelic. And I'm wondering if you can break that down for us, and then we can get into more of the nuts and bolts around that, because I know you talk about differences between purpose for each one of those and even liabilities and different things. So wherever you want to go with that, I'd love to share some of that information with the audience.
Okay, beautiful. Well, this is a paradigm that came to me through my clients. And it's a paradigm that I learned a little bit about when I was being trained in regression, which is over 20 years ago now, maybe 25 years ago. But it's my clients that teach me. And that's what I absolutely love. And I don't work as a channel or a medium. I basically guide my clients to become their own channel. But my sort of encyclopedia, so to speak, of who are we as a soul, where do we come from, why are we here, why do we have these issues or these skills and gifts, stems from about 27, 28 years of guiding regression. So that said, my original paradigm was So I'm trying to think how to make this simple. My original paradigm was a soul incarnates on the earth. And the basic picture of that, I always try to boil things down enough that anybody could comprehend it. So the original paradigm is that a soul agrees, and it truly is an agreement, agrees to come into body on earth. And earth is school. Earth is the sometimes challenging laboratory of learning, moment by moment, year by year, relationship by relationship, and that sort of thing. So as my client regression practice, continued over the course of years, maybe about 8 to 10 years into about 27 or so years of regression practice, I started having numerous clients that are souls that aren't primarily designed to come to Earth. There's basically two types of those souls. So let me just step backwards for a minute. The first type of soul is what I call an earth-based soul. And an earth-based soul is a soul that basically originates to primarily incarnate on Earth and grow and evolve lifetime to lifetime to lifetime. We all trip and fall in certain lives. We have what we call karma, but we also have dharma, meaning what we learn and accomplish. An earth-based soul comes here to Earth primarily. Then there are souls from the greater celestial realm. I use the term interplanetary. You could exchange that term with ET, starseed. Those terms really mean the same. Souls come into body on Earth on occasion who come from locations in the universe. Now, setting aside angelic souls, I'll come to that in a moment or two, but interplanetary souls come from somewhere in the universe, star systems, planets, interdimensional space. And if those souls, or when those souls agree to come to Earth, they agree to come because they come from a healthy culture somewhere in the greater universe. We need their healthy perspective. Now, they don't come to Earth as, in terms of evolution, they don't come to Earth as 10s on a scale of 10, but they come to Earth as usually 8s and a halves on a scale of 10. And they have you might just say a healthier notion of life. How should we treat each other? What's a healthy diet? What's a healthy way of relating to someone? Basically understanding, I don't know, it's always hard to put words to this, cleaner living. And I don't just mean cleaner diet. How to honor their own needs, their own emotions, how to honor someone else's needs and emotions. Those are interplanetary souls. Interplanetary souls often, not always, but often struggle with being in body. They have trouble with some of the, I know I keep using the word healthy, unhealthy. They struggle with a lot of human unhealthy behavior, mistreatment, ignoring someone's needs, ignoring their emotions. But they also struggle with a lot of, not just, they struggle with their own emotional issues sometimes. They struggle with a lot of physiological kinds of things. They struggle with allergies, autoimmune disorders, digestive issues. Sometimes they're diagnosed on the spectrum. They're very wise, but they're not. I'll use an example of a dear friend that I know is an IP soul. She's a medical doctor. She's a very capable OBGYN medical doctor. She was, and how old is she? She's about 60 or so. She was diagnosed with lupus years ago. So she changed her diet. She changed her way of working. But she has to pay close attention to her own physical and emotional needs. IP souls also have extreme gifts, musical gifts, artistic gifts, teaching gifts, and that sort of thing. So those are interplanetary souls. I work with a lot of those still in my ongoing practice. So I'll pause for a minute and I can go on more, but you guys may have questions and then I'll chat about angelics.
So it sounds like the interplanetary souls have gifts and abilities and talents that would be beneficial to be shared with humanity, with those living on the planet. But at the same time, when they come in, because this is not really their home or area where they typically visit often, then there's they have trouble climatizing to the realm. Is that correct?
That's just a perfect way, Taya, of explaining it. And climatizing is a good word. It's like, yes, it's like they'll say, I just can't be in big crowds. Big crowds drive me crazy. I can't be in, situations where people are acting crazy or there's just unhealthy behavior. The beauty of regression, and let me just say, sometimes these people have an inkling they're not from here, and that's the way they say it. Sometimes they have no inkling. I, at times, begin to get a hunch during the interview, pre-regression, that they're interplanetary. I don't tell them that at all. I just sort of zip it up, and because the regression is the avenue of discovering that. And so they discover it during the regression, and then we process it after the regression. And suddenly it's like, oh, there's something wrong with me. I'm not weird. I really work hard to help them normalize who they are. But yes, they're often quite skilled. I use a quick example, and listeners may or may not, they can go look this up on the internet. Maybe 3 years ago, there was a man who won America's Got Talent. A man in his 30s. He'd been diagnosed on the spectrum. He had he was visually challenged. His mother was his key support person. And this young man was incredibly talented musically. He wrote music. He is a singer-songwriter. Again, you can find him on the internet. He had these incredible gifts. He also had these incredible challenges.
Is there a difference in the purpose then for coming here, whether you're from interplanetary or if you're Earth-based, as far as incarnating back here on Earth between those two groups?
Good question. Overall, I would say no. Let me try. It's like such a big subject, and I want to make it sort of palatable. An Earth-based soul starts off their soul's evolution in the Earth body, incarnate on Earth, embodied on Earth, and they start off as very young souls. Now, the bottom line is, in my regression work, truly, I don't work with very young souls. Not that there's anything wrong with that. We were all, if we're Earth-based, we were all young souls. But young souls aren't really ready or interested in regression and spirituality and this kind of perspective. But so Earth-based souls that I work with are usually at least mid-range of soul evolution. And so just giving that as a kind of a precursor statement, Earth-based souls and IP souls, interplanetary souls, come to continue evolving. They also come to aid the needed evolution of humanity. So yes is the answer, that there's a related similarity to wanting to affect change in our human culture.
And what about soul clusters, Linda? Do Earth-based souls get born into IP families or vice versa? Or do you find that we're typically sticking with our soul clusters, which are separate? What has been your experience?
Yeah. Okay. Earth-based souls, to use that term cluster, I often call it a soul group, but cluster works too. Earth-based souls begin their incarnational journey. Another way to put it is in a soul homeroom. I realize in many places in the world, homeroom doesn't exist anymore. I grew up with homeroom. So earth-based souls initially, as they're evolving, belong to a small group of souls, about 15 to 20 souls. Interplanetary souls also belong to a small group of souls when they come into being, and even before they incarnate on Earth. Interplanetary souls come from a very small soul cluster. It's usually 2 to 5 souls in total. But they do, just again, to make it simple, Earth-based EB, interplanetary IP. EBs and IPs have fellow souls in their soul homeroom. For Earth-based souls, I'll say I happen to be an Earth-based soul. We incarnate repetitively with many of the souls in our immediate cluster and surrounding clusters. Sort of like a stem of grapes. On that stem of grapes is our cluster, or my cluster, and then there are adjacent clusters. So quick example would be, I have 2 adult children. Our oldest child is from my cluster. Our youngest child is from, you might say, the cluster next door. Interplanetary souls, when they come to Earth, might incarnate with a soul from their small cluster. They often incarnate with Earth-based souls. And so, as I was saying to a client yesterday, who discovered she was interplanetary through her regression, and she's married. So an interplanetary soul in a primary romantic relationship usually is married or in a long-standing romantic relationship with an EB. Why? You guys could probably guess, but why? Because they need the stability and the familiarity of being with someone who, you might say, gets Earth to some extent. Yeah.
Fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
What about angelic souls then?
Yeah. This is the sort of, I'll say, newest, even though it's not, I've probably been working with, overtly working with angelic souls for 10 to 12 years, but the key details of angelics came to me as kind of the latter piece of understanding different types of souls. So, angelic souls come from the angelic realm. What's the purpose of the angelic realm? That's to support divine energy. You can call it God, you can call it the source, you call it the Tao, call it what you want. Divine energy is that high frequency of extremely evolved energy that understands healthiness in all ways. So there is a cadre of souls that make up the angelic realm. They really are messengers or ambassadors of divine energy. And the easiest way I like to describe it is the signature energy of an angelic soul, if I'm working with one in my practice, is they carry pure love and compassion energy. They have this heart that is huge. Now, they have to learn how to protect that to some extent, but their whole orientation to life is right-brained, is caring and nurturance, is almost total non-judgment. And we need them. We need that perspective on Earth in greater quantities, because we don't have enough love, compassion, and non-judgment on our planet. Angelic souls also like IPs. Angelic souls aren't really designed to come to Earth. IPs and angelics, or what I call angelic realm or AR, IPs and ARs, I know again through regression, spend a lot of time before they ever incarnate on Earth being prepared at their home location to be able to come to Earth and cope with the way humanity operates. But angelic realm souls tend to be the most, I was going to say the most vulnerable. IPs are rather vulnerable, but angelic realm souls bring this quality of caring about everyone. And then they have to learn how to deal with that on Earth, but they are fascinating people.
You can totally see where you would almost need to like have a buddy system where it's like you connect with angelic ones, connect with earth-based ones or IPs, like to really create a bit of a support network for each other. Because if you're all just in like one group, it could be really challenging to be here. Like you almost need to have the earth-based souls to bring some kind of support and grounding for these other people.
A bit of a GPS system.
Yeah.
Yes, and in families, if there isn't so most families, just if everybody that's listening just thinks about their own immediate blood family, in those blood families there are always EBs, but in those blood families they're probably, in that immediate nuclear family, there's usually at least an IP or an AR. Now, no one's family would have a lot of IPs or ARs. Two reasons. One is there are not a lot of IPs or ARs on the planet, even though I come into contact with a lot of them because of what I do. And it's to help them cope with being here and continue to live their purpose. But IPs and ARs in nuclear families are less common than EBs. And just like you're saying, Jason, EBs are sort of like, they have a bit of a better map of how to navigate human life, those EBs.
Linda, what about ascended masters that we've heard of? So the Jesus, the Buddha, and some of these figures that have stepped into our realm to be able to navigate all of humanity in a particular direction that is more beneficial for all of us.
I love that question because it's such an important piece. Again, a couple of comments. So these souls that we know, again, as Jesus, Buddha, but also highly advanced souls. Oh my gosh, let me see if I can not make this too complicated. So just a quick comment about the soul of Jesus. And I'll just say that religion doesn't necessarily formal Western religion, and of course Eastern religion, because Eastern religion teaches reincarnation and that sort of thing. But formal Western religion can easily sit side by side these concepts. The soul of Jesus, we all know if we study Christianity, Jesus didn't found Christianity. It's those that came after Jesus that founded Christianity. We also know, if you study it, that soul's name wasn't Jesus. That's a name given to that soul post-crucifixion. So when we think about Jesus, Buddha, Moses, and then a lot of other names like Master Saint Germain, Dwal Kul, many of these ascended master names, virtually all of these ascended masters, excluding the archangels, which I'll say a bit about, these ascended masters that we're talking about, these are advanced earth-based souls. They've spent lots of lives on Earth. Some of them still incarnate. Some of them do not incarnate any longer. So they are very real. They are like senior guides, senior spiritual guides. None of us are without a spiritual guide. Then the archangels. And when I say the archangels, a lot of people think of the classic four. My understanding, again, all this comes from regression, repetitive client regression, where I overlap information. I heard it from this client and that client, and then 3 months later, another client, and blah, blah, blah. The archangels, of course, they are the head souls of the angelic realm, a step or two below the divine. And of course, they're angelic souls. They do also operate as guides. I actually had a client, I don't know, Tuesday, I think it was, doesn't matter. Archangel Gabriel was her guide. And the way the information came forward, I have no doubt that Archangel Gabriel is her guide.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In regards to guides, how do you find that people can strengthen that connection with their guides, and on a regular basis with that sort of connection to a higher guidance, to something that's outside of just the ego, mind, identity, perceived sort of limitations, perceptions that often we kind of get caught up in, and sort of tap into something that's a little bit higher wisdom, I would say?
Yeah, I have 2 or 3 responses. I want to try to remember them all if I can. One overriding word, and it's so easy to say this, but I think it's so important, is trust. Because the 3 of us are sitting here talking. We aren't the norm on the planet. This conversation is not the norm on the planet. You guys know that, I'm sure.
That's why we're having it, to make it more normal.
We're trying to normalize these conversations.
Yeah, and it's so important that you do what you do, because yes, then you broaden, you sort of, the fancy word would be promulgate. You spread this, which is awesome. You're doing, I'm sure, what you've been guided to do, and that's so often what I talk to people about is follow your passions, follow where you're drawn. So trust is one. I often talk to people about intuition, and even spiritual people need some reminders. So intuition is left brain, right brain. And so some of us intuitively, we're very imagery based. We see scenes in our mind's eye, eyes open, eyes closed. We perceive intuitive scenes. Trust those intuitive scenes. So that's clairvoyance. Then there's clairsentience. Many of us, this happens to me, I can walk into a room and suddenly I'm feeling an emotion, and it took me years to figure out I'm not necessarily feeling my own emotion. I'm not necessarily filled with anxiety for my own personal reasons. I'm not necessarily feeling a little down for my own personal reasons. I might be feeling somebody else's feelings. But in the case of clairsentience, sometimes when our guide shows up, if our guide knows we're strongly clairsentient or emotion-based with our intuition, our guide knows that our guide could use a trigger emotion, like suddenly we feel joy, or suddenly we feel like laughing. It's like, well, where did that come from? That's because we're clairsentient, and that might be our guide's, signature way of getting us to know they're there. Some of us are clairsomatic. Our body is our physical receiver. My husband's very much this way. He might wake up in the morning and he'll say, oh, my lower back feels kind of uncomfortable. We'll turn on the TV, we'll turn on the news, and there's been an earthquake halfway around the globe. He's feeling that. So that's clairsomatic. A guide can give us a trigger symptom. It could be an eyelid twitching. It could be a popping of our eardrum. But our body might be our receptor. Then lastly, and this is extremely common and it happens for me a lot, I'm rather mental. And so my guides show up in my thoughts, like they give me words, phrases, suggestions. They keep prompting me with the name of somebody. So I reach out to that maybe friend I haven't seen in 6 months. And the friend says, "Oh, Linda, I'm so glad you reached out to me. I'm really having a big problem, but I didn't want to bother you." So if we trust we're left-brained, right-brained, and we're intuitive, that's how we can connect with our guides.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I've also found like pay attention to synchronicities that keep lining up. I always find that is like a fun one. It's almost like a spiritual kind of like yes or something. I find like
It's like our guides are having fun with
yeah.
us.
Totally. And just to pick up on that, Taya, for just a moment, our guides like to have fun with us. And oh my gosh, I've heard in so many regressions said by the guide to the client, you've got to take more time to lighten up. You've got to take more time to play. What do you love to do? Go do it more. So that's so important.
Well, that probably ties back even into our soul's purpose. And I think in your book you talk about the soul's purpose as well as the soul's promise and vow. And can you break that down a little bit? And as far as how do people that are struggling with that connect more into their soul's original intention?
The easy way, if people will think about this, is when I say you, anybody listening, what are you passionate about? Are you passionate about helping others? Are you, people often think, okay, if I'm going to figure out my soul's purpose, it's got to be, well, I should write a book, or, well, I should do something very overt that's work related. That's often a piece of our soul's purpose. But at times, our soul's purpose is to be the most committed parent we can be, or the most committed neighbor we can be, that it doesn't have to be magnanimous. Yes. And I mean, even if I think about myself, it's always easier to use myself as an example. Yes, of course, my soul's purpose is to do the work that I do. But along with that, I know a lot about my past lives. I, spent years researching and learning about my own past lives. I have past lives where I was a parent and I was a negligent parent in past lives. We've all had past lives where we behaved in ways we wish we hadn't. That's just, it's the norm of human incarnation because we have free will when we come into the human body. But I know that I've passed lives as an unevolved parent. Fortunately, I always wanted to be a parent in this lifetime, so that's good. But I knew part of the balance that I was to accomplish in my life today was to be a mother, was to be a grandmother, which I am, and to have that be a very important part of my life. So people need to think about what do they love and what really resonates, and we might say turns them on, lights them up. What is that? And follow that.
That'll be a good journal practice for a lot of listeners, I think. Linda, can you describe karma? Can you define karma?
Yeah. Again, excellent question. Karma is real. Karma, as I said a moment ago, it's one of the unique qualities of coming into the human body. No matter what our plan was before we came, and we always have a plan before we come, we have free will. And so we make, missteps. We make not the best choices. Our guides understand that. We're harder on ourselves usually than our guides are. Now, not if we're someone who regularly used people and there certainly on occasion are souls, think about a despot, think about the leader of a country who is the leader is a very much a narcissistic soul and is really misusing people. That does happen. And that isn't something our guides just shine on. But oh my God, here's a common thing. I think about themes that just pop into my mind. I will often have clients who go to past lives where they were a community leader. And I don't necessarily mean they were the head of a country or the king or queen of a castle, but they were the leader. It could have been hundreds of years ago. They were the leader of a group, and a trauma occurred, like their village was, there was a village massacre. That soul, that leader, may carry guilt from not being able to protect their villagers. And often when that soul leaves that lifetime, they carry an imprint of guilt or lack of accomplishment. That might be the past life that surfaces in the regression. I don't choose the past life. The client's guides and the client's soul, their higher self, chooses the past life. It's fairly common for the client to come upon those lives where they couldn't protect their community, and the client needs to let himself, herself off the hook. And that's what the guides often are saying to the client.
Linda, do you think it's possible to have, when continual incarnations, I would imagine the idea would be that we accumulate a certain amount of wisdom as we keep going along, with the idea that we ultimately become more loving, more benevolent as we move along with more and more impact, just because we learn that, we start to see that. Is it possible that, it makes me think of the book Neil Donald Walsh did on The Little Soul in the Sun, around the idea of having this conversation before
Our
coming
kids'
down.
book.
Yeah. Where, as they were having this conversation of like, I want to learn this and this and this. And almost makes me like teary when I think about it, because I feel like how selfless it is. But the idea that the other soul would say, well, then I'll come down, I'll help you learn that. But in order to do that, I have to then, you won't recognize me. I have to show up as a very different, so, like the alcoholic parent, or even I think like on a big picture, when we see, there's a lot of horrific stuff going on in the world. And sometimes I wonder, like, are some of these even highly evolved souls that have come down to play a contrasting role so that the populace can kind of be pushed to rise into a different way?
Based on a divine plan, maybe.
Yeah.
That's very common, what you're describing. Two things. One is, yes, because I think we're sort of talking about two scenarios. Often we reincarnate with the soul where there was karma, and we're going to have the opportunity to balance it. And, people often say to me, they ask me a lot, or fairly often, well, Linda, why don't we know about our past lives? Why don't, most of us, we ought to know about our past lives rather than having to figure them out through various means. And there are different means. Regression isn't the only avenue to figure that out. But if we knew that we were an uninvolved parent to a soul, and then they came in as our mother, as our child, as our sister, we wouldn't have that blank slate to work with and just choose our behavior without any pushing from knowledge of past lives. So that happens all the time. And yes, also, there are souls that come in, for example, as a street person, and there's nothing wrong with that soul. They came in to teach us humility. They came in to teach us compassion. And they agreed to be a street person or be, because I'm trained in, abnormal psychology, or schizophrenic. And someone needs to care for that schizophrenic person in their lifetime. They agreed to carry those traits in this current life.
You also talk about past life regression and then between life soul regression. What's the difference between those?
Yeah. One is an expansion of the other. So past life regression is just what it says. I'm going to guide the client. I'm going to do an interview first. I'm going to guide the client to relax. We know through brain research that relaxation opens us up more to our intuition. Relaxation and hypnosis are directly related. And then the purpose of past life regression is usually what happens, is the discovery of one past life in great detail, scene by scene by scene. We go all the way to the death scene. Then we evaluate or analyze the life. For what reason did the client's guides choose to show the client that life? What is it explaining about current life to the client? So that's a past life regression. Between lives, what I call between lives soul regression, is what I just explained, but it's an expansion beyond past life regression. At the ending of the past life, the client again experiences how they died. Now, my client doesn't feel like they're physically dying in human life, but they know how they died in the past life. The between lives regression is at the point of the ending of the past life. We follow that automatic and natural journey of the soul when that slice of soul that caused the client to be alive in the past life, that slice of soul, I like to call it autopilot, leaves that past life body when cardiopulmonary functions are, have ceased. We follow that natural journey. And this is what happens every time we die. That piece of soul elevates, you might say, increases its frequency, and ultimately returns to the higher realm, the soul realm. And I always try to use my hands to show it, and steps back into the higher self, the totality of the energy of the higher self. And then the rest of the regression is at the higher self level, the soul level of the client. And it really becomes now time. We almost always talk to a guide. We can ask questions. The guide has benevolent information to help that person understand, how did they plan current life? What are the reasons for certain issues? Who are the souls they've known before? Are they EB? Are they IP? Are they angelic? That kind of information comes forward in the longer regression.
I find it all really fascinating. And you must have had some really profound experiences yourself, just seeing and being a part of this process. Has there been any real big aha moments for you, just in even having these conversations with people? Any insights that have popped to you that even influenced you from hearing other people?
Jason, truly, and I don't say this just lightly, I am influenced all the time. I'm learning something new. I'm learning something that relates to my own life. I'm learning something that I'll give an example. An example just pops in my mind. But the beauty for me, and I feel so blessed, honestly, is I get to travel with the client. So I get to learn about the higher realm. I get to learn about IP souls, where they come from, why they come. I don't know, an example, it's probably my guides telling me to just say this briefly. One thing I know, let me see how to say this and make it simple. One thing I know is that there are many advanced souls that continue to incarnate. There are many advanced souls that have past lives in earlier eras of time. One example, I'll just give you one example, is the soul, and I'm not speaking from religion, but this soul did exist in what are, longstanding religious teachings, the Moses soul. the Moses soul is a highly advanced earth-based soul. Yes, that soul was the soul of Moses. But what I've learned through clients who gain all kinds of information, and we can ask questions, is the Moses soul is the soul of the one we know as Gandhi. So that soul continues, not kept, continues to incarnate. And that's one example. The Moses soul incarnates today. The Moses soul, and this is what happens with highly advanced souls, the Moses soul can have more than one simultaneous earth incarnation. That soul is currently incarnating as some nameable public figures, as well as some everyday people. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of how that works. I've learned that through regression. It's incredibly, I know, Jason, you keep saying fascinating. I feel the same way. It is totally fascinating. But I can tell you there are times when I come upon a client, it's not very often, that is the incarnation of one of these longstanding souls. That's, again, not common. And, I don't want to say I've regressed lots of Cleopatras and lots of Mary Magdalenes and blah, blah, blah. That's not the case. But these souls continue to work to help humanity is the bottom line.
Yeah.
So interesting. I feel like our reality is just so much more vast than what we had previously conceived. And it's so amazing to be able to talk and have these conversations now and just blow our preconceived notions out of the water. Because I feel like so much of what we had previously worked with may have been relevant at the time, but we're all clearly just asking for more. Like, we're ready for more. What had satiated us before is just futile now. It just doesn't satisfy anymore. And even how you're describing souls and pieces of souls or slices of souls,
like
or it's
fractals of the soul.
It's been described as fractals of souls as well. Like, that's really fascinating, and we can't totally even wrap our mind around it. And I've had to revisit it over and over and over again, and now I can digest that a little bit more because of all the ways in which we have spoken about this in different languaging, perhaps, but from different people. But it's been coming up over and over and over again, and I love it because it allows our reality to make more sense. Even our challenges that we have, like some of the. And if you don't mind, I wanted to share this simple anecdotal paragraph that you had in this book, the Evolving Soul book. And here you stated, here a soul regression client explains, I am being told that my commitment to care for my 92-year-old mother and walk alongside her until she completes this lifetime is for the soul evolution of us both. In a past life, she was my 10-year-old daughter, and I abandoned because I had died of a broken heart when my husband, her father, left me. Now we are balancing the karmic remnants of the past incarnation by ending the conflict we'd had in our present life. I am voluntarily caring for her in peace while she is open to receiving my nurturance. Like, I feel like it brings so much more context and richness to our lives, this knowledge that you're sharing, and you're allowing people, you're creating a vessel and an opportunity for people to tap into, because it brings reason to the circumstances of their lives, which I think is so important, because it catapults us right away out of victimhood. It right away brings up feelings of deep compassion and forgiveness. Like it's just a natural byproduct of the truth that we're able to tap into in a very, very real and tangible way.
And
So,
brings like meaning into the senseless or chaos, and which then, like you said, catapults you into a different field of consciousness where you can just perceive and then interact with the world differently.
I mean, I couldn't say it better myself. As I said somewhere earlier in our discussion, at the core of me, I'm a therapist. And when I discovered this kind of work, there's nothing wrong with traditional psychology, psychotherapy, and that helps a lot of people. But when I discovered this work, it expands that ability to understand ourselves and normalize ourselves in ways that, well, as I said, that I never understood until about 30 years ago. And so most of us are all too hard on ourselves. And we need to understand who we are at the core and why we have feelings, thoughts, skills, inclinations, and honor them.
Linda, are there any common questions that clients come to you with wanting to have answered and addressed?
Well, the most common question, Taya, is when they come for the longer regression. And let me just say, when people come for the longer regression, part of the homework that I give them before we come to the day of their regression is I want them to create about 5 key questions that they hope the session will answer. And then we pose those questions verbally during the regression to the client's guide. And the answers come through the client, not through me, but through the client. The most common question is, why am I here? For what reason did I plan this current life? And then other questions are things like, what does this health problem mean? What is the purpose of this relationship? But the most overriding question is what I call life purpose. For what reason did I come into body this time? Or reasons, it's another important piece. We come into body with more than one purpose, but why? Why am I here?
As far as the health concerns that most people are dealing with, are there reoccurring messages that consistently come through with regards to that?
Or themes to them?
Yeah. Yes is the answer. 2 or 3 different thoughts about that. One is, as I said, often, but not always, but often the IP souls I work with, they're dealing with health issues. Why? Basically because those are souls, IPs and angelics, but even IPs more than angelics. IPs haven't incarnated in the human body many times. So they're not used to this container and how to operate. It may seem weird to people, but they're not used to how to function within these human bodies. And then health problems, as you would imagine, sometimes come from past lives. They also sometimes we agree to be a teacher. Like, okay, I'm going to be diagnosed with X disease or X syndrome or, whatever it might be. And the people around me are going to, the people around me, I hope, have the opportunity, or they have the opportunity, and I hope they will become more nurturing, become more caring. Or I have to be more patient with myself. I expect a lot of myself, but I have to rest for 30 minutes every afternoon. I have to learn how to nurture myself because I never learned that before. So I have this health issue that requires it. There's always purpose to a health issue, and hopefully it's not a serious, but it is for some people, and there is usually meaning to that health issue.
Mm-hmm. Something that came up that I just wanted to share. My father is going through leukemia. He's in the later stages of leukemia and he's been having a rough time for probably about a year, and it's progressively getting more trying for him. And on a daily basis, I work on opening up my energy centers, my chakras, while I'm sitting in quiet at some point through the day or through the night. And I know, and I've noticed that there's almost like I've checked in with my heart, and I'm like, what is it that's so tight? What is it that kind of constricts and restricts its opening or its fullness or its vibrancy? And I've had the knowing drop in that, and I share this because it might land for others who are listening in, that part of the gift of what it is that the trying times that we're in right now, with so many people becoming ill or passing on, is that it allows a tenderness to rise within those who remain. And in essence, you know, the blasting open of the heart doors in ways that it possibly hadn't been before, because seeing a loved one, I mean, my dad and I have had a very challenging relationships, to be truthful, since I hit puberty a long time ago. And he's a very challenging man. And it's probably no accident that we've ended up at this time. We actually lived in Mexico for a while, but we both felt really compelled to come back to where our families are. And my parents live on the upper floor and we're on the lower floor. We live in the same house right now. So, you know, if there was any doubt that we're in this time to kind of untie or work through karmic stuff, I feel like we're a fine example of that happening in the here and now. But through seeing him go from this really tough, strong, stern, you know, they don't make him like this anymore. This level of masculine energy that he embodies. But seeing that go to who he is now, really frail, 120 pounds, probably soaking wet, has trouble walking, has trouble hammering and working with his hands, which he loves to do, is really heart tenderizing for all of us who are blessed to witness this impermanence of the physicality that we all embody. So yeah, I share that in case it's any solace to anyone who's listening in, who is taking care of a loved one, a friend or family who is going through physical and health challenges.
I'll just say briefly, I know we could, dig into a lot of these kinds of things. I'll say briefly, Taya, the story about the 92-year-old mother and the past life about abandoning the daughter is me. That is my story.
Oh.
And I share that openly now. And without giving a huge long story and a lot of detail, I became responsible for my mother's care in the final 7 years of her life. It's the same story. We had a challenging relationship, same as you described, but a challenging relationship and she didn't live in my home. She was in a senior living center near where I live. But I became the responsible child to make sure she was cared for. And as you read that piece out of my book, we gradually healed our relationship because she became open to trusting that I cared about her. And I'll just say, and I know this, you're using this, our discussion in a public way, but my mother has passed, so I think it's fine. I remember so clearly, as you just spoke, Taya, as my mother was, oh my gosh, she was maybe 9 months to a year from passing. I went to visit her one evening, and I knocked on the door of her room, and she didn't respond. And so I opened the door, and as I opened the door, she was with an aide coming toward me. And she had, it's so funny that this came to me, but it feels important to share. She was coming toward her bathroom, which was near the door. And so there she was stark naked with a one of those the way women used to do it, those plastic shower caps, with her walker, and with the aide making sure she could, because my mother was very frail by that point. But she just saw me and said, "Hi, honey, come on in." Now, when we had a more conflictual relationship, she wouldn't have been standing there stark naked saying to me, "Hi, honey, come on in." And so that's what popped into my mind as you were sharing that. And so I guess I just want to say, may you experience the healing and the balancing with the soul that is your father as you pay attention to your own needs and your own chakras, and he's right there where you live. May you have the blessing that I came to have of healing my relationship with my mother before she passed. Now, I'm going to add one more quick thing and then stop jabbering. We can heal relationships after someone passes. And you probably know that, and you've probably had speakers and teachers with you that share that. We can talk to the soul of the loved one. So it doesn't mean we can't heal it after they pass. But there's also a beauty in healing it before they pass. So anyway, I just felt compelled to share that.
Thank you.
I think that's beautiful, Linda, and so true. I think that healing can happen at any time, but there is something really beautiful about being able to do it with the person during.
And challenging.
It's also, I was just going to say, because it's also the heart of the most challenging too. So I feel like there's such an expansion that can take place when we are able to do that in the here and now.
Totally.
I know we're coming up on.
But we also signed up for the challenge. Like, I think people need to hear that too. Like, we signed up to be embodied, and we signed up to be here and now, and we signed up to, to have these people within our lives and,
push our
boots on
buttons
ground. And yes, because we have all that we need in order to be able to work through all the stuff that we initially signed up to be here for.
Completely true.
We had one conversation a while back, and it was the idea of almost like a video game where you keep leveling up. Every time you come here, it's like the game then gets harder. So it's like you actually get different types of challenges that might push you in different ways and might even be more challenging. But at the same time, every time you're leveling up yourself, so you've got the tools within you to be able to manage it and deal with that. So I think anybody going through challenges, if you do have what's there and required all within you to be able to do what you need to do.
Yeah.
Linda, what I'm curious about too is, as we're finishing up here, over the past few years, have you had any specific insights that have been different from what you have experienced over the past 20 some odd years or 30 years? Just because this does seem to be a really unique time. And I know lots of guests and different people we've talked about, from indigenous elders to shamans to you name it. There's a lot of very unique stuff going on, particularly not just in the planet, but I mean in the whole cosmos in general right at the moment. Any insights that have been different that have come up over the past few years from your work?
Yes. I'm trying to think of how to say this and how to make it simple. It is clear to me from clients as well as my own intuition that the higher realm, the higher wisdom, the source, however you want to put that, is highly concerned about various issues in humanity, whether that's the climate issues that exists on our planet, whether that's the diverse politics of people that just get stuck in their own vantage point and don't choose to comprehend, the vantage point of the other side, you might say, the sometimes lack of, again, same thing that I guess as I just said, the lack of seeing or accepting someone else's perspective, the lack of evolution of humanity. And what I hear through a lot of regressions is that, and I sort of said this or maybe alluded to it today, the higher realm keeps working, I'll say brainstorming, if I can use that word. The higher realm keeps brainstorming ways of guiding humans in the hopes that humans make better decisions or the best decisions. And part of that is why I see more IPs and angelics in my practice, is because there are more advanced souls coming into body, or just as you guys just talked about, or being pushed to elevate because we need that elevation. So I know that some of us at the soul level are working to prepare other advanced souls to come into body, because the higher realm is concerned about how life in certain ways is lived on this planet and could be lived in a more functional, more healthy manner. So I hear about that a relative amount in regression work.
I have a question with regards to then children. As they're coming in, as these new souls are coming in from the spirit world onto the physical realm, could it be then that their role is going to be quite different and quite perhaps even more pivotal in as far as dictating our evolution on the planet? And how do we then best nurture and support them on their journey?
Well, you guys probably know, since you said you have children, and I have very adult children, but I have grandchildren. And so I see this, you probably see this in your own children, and I see it more in our grandchildren's, in that generation, the younger generation. There are more experienced souls coming into human bodies. Now, some of these experienced souls, they sort of run the gamut. Some of them are these very, very gifted. They're either academically gifted, they're musically gifted, they're, all these new, robotics and all that, they're gifted in that manner. And some of them are not just gifted, they are gifted, but they're also challenged. But they're wise. And so, yes, there are more advanced souls, even though I'll just say, and I know this from regression, experienced souls is a small portion of the human population. And experienced souls are no better than anyone else. They've just done a lot of work to get to the point of advancement. But more experienced souls are coming, because that's the way the higher realm is brainstorming how to affect change. And many of these advanced souls need help understanding themselves and accepting themselves. So yes is the answer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one thing we've kind of found that with our kids is just from a perspective, people can sort of see if this fits for them. But
we have a 5-year-old, a 7-year-old, and an 18-year-old.
And particularly over the last while, with our 5 and 7-year-old, and I would say with my 7-year-old particularly, she just knows certain things, and it's actually I'm seeing her literally remember things. Like we do a lot of, right now we're doing a lot of wild crafting. So we go out and we look for weeds that are medicine, and then we dry them, we make teas, we make tinctures, and we're doing this stuff together now with her.
So no longer weeds.
So it's not weeds anymore, it's medicines. But so a real love for the land and being able to incorporate that. And she sees stuff, and then she just knows, like she will see, it's like, oh, Daddy, this one's good for this or this. And literally the other day, Taya had a bit of a headache, and Sophie had picked this one flower, and then she kept saying, "Mummy, just check this on the thing and see what it is and what it's good for." And
And I said, okay, well, it's a creeping buttercup. And she said, okay, can you use the other app that Daddy got recently and check that one? And I said, honey, I have a headache right now, and to look onto these digital devices is just not comfortable for me.
but she wouldn't let it
She
go.
was so persistent, and I said, okay, let's try the other app. And then we take a picture of the flower using the other app, and sure enough, that also had description of what the native community, the indigenous, had typically used it for medicinally, and it was used for headaches.
They would actually grind it up and smell it. And so then she took it, she goes, "I can do it," took it to the poultice and ground it up for her. And
See, she said,
and from
"Here,
there-
Mummy," and sure enough, it alleviated my headache.
So what it brought up for us was just this: when your kids are really like, and you have to, I think, discern the difference between sort of like more of like a neediness, sort of addiction to something that, oh, I need that, I want that, or their senses have been hijacked, or dopamine hijacking, all this kind of stuff you have to be aware of. But I feel like when your kids are really like strongly drawn to something, especially if it's tied, I think, into the natural world, listen to it, like follow it through and see where it goes, because we're so quick to sort of blanketly put like, we know more, no, that's not important, or something along those lines, and see where it goes. I know for us, it's been huge learnings in just sort of allowing it to follow through and giving the time to in the space to allow that to come up and see where it goes. Because it changes your perspective when we think of like, okay, well, part of what we're doing here is lighting up different memories for her, I think, in different ways that she's actually here to cultivate. So then how do we support that?
Yes, and when we're parents or grandparents of these advanced souls in these young bodies, you know, at the soul level, we've agreed to take on the responsibility to support this 5-year-old, this 7-year-old. I see this in my grandchildren or teenagers, and to support them and to let their gifts shine and do just what you said, not just say, "Oh, you're just 5 years old. What do you know?" It's like, oh, no. That's an old soul in a 5-year-old body. Yeah, and we've agreed to be the support system to let their gifts grow and grow and grow.
Yeah.
And the last question, Linda, I wanted to ask you, just so that people have an understanding of what a session even looks like. Can you describe that briefly? And are they aware of the conversation, of what comes out of their mouth, or is it recorded and it's presented to them afterward? How does that work?
Okay, yeah, good question. So relaxation / hypnosis does not mean the client is going to be in a zombie state, in a unaware state. So the client is aware during the whole regression. They know what they're saying, but it is flowing through them. Yes, the sessions are all recorded. Because of COVID, I used to travel about 50 to 60% of the time, guiding some regression in my home office, but guiding, domestically and abroad. Now, virtually all the regression that I guide is on Zoom, just like we are. And so anyone can have a regression. They are awake, they are aware, the whole session is recorded. The client may not remember small little details and nuances, but then we have conversation on email back and forth. They can process it further with me if they choose. But yes, they are conscious, they know what's happening, and they have the recording to go back to.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Linda, where can people learn more about the work that you're doing? I know you've got a bunch of different courses that are offered, your books. Where can people learn more about you guys?
Best way is our website. So the website, this is all run together, is Raven, like the bird, Raven Heart, like the heart on your chest, ravenheartcenter.com. And what I'm doing, where I'm going, what's happening is all on the website.
And are there group sessions as well at your center, or are they mostly individual based?
Well, it's interesting that you're asking that, Taya. I recently, because sometimes my regression schedule is complicated and sometimes people have to wait a bit of time to have a regression. I've recently started a small group, what I might call a spiritual mentoring community that's going to meet periodically, open to anyone, where we can have discussions and ask questions and that sort of thing, and come together in a small group setting. And that option is on my website.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. We'll share all that information below the video and on our website as well.
Perfect.
That was wonderful, Linda. What a beautiful conversation. Thank you so much for joining us today and being a part of this really important series.
I mean, totally my pleasure. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to inform and educate. And I love what you guys are doing. So it's just been my great pleasure.
Thank you, Linda.